Allow me to conduct a short experiment with you all. Imagine that you're driving through a large city, a city like Chicago, for example. It's Friday afternoon. You've just finished up with your last conference call of the week. You're stoked about the weekend. And in your haste, you make a couple of wrong turns. You find yourself in a neighborhood that you might consider the bad part of town. Your conference call went long, and your cell phone battery's dead. No Google Maps. On Friday afternoon, in a neighborhood such as this, the sidewalks and streets are filled with a lot of people walking around, a lot of people just hanging around. You start to notice abandoned buildings, boarded up buildings, bars on windows. You start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Visualize, if you will, the people that are all around you in this situation. Are they white? Most of the people that have found themselves in this situation like this have a common observation, that when faced with this situation, everybody around me does not look like me. Have you ever wondered why? About 9 years ago, I was sitting in a strategy session for a not-for-profit that I'm very close to that serves a under-resourced community on the west side of Chicago. This community, by every metric, is poor, segregated, and dangerous. In fact, it had recently been voted one of the most dangerous neighborhoods, the most dangerous neighborhood in the country by a major news publication. I raised my hand and I said, "What happened here? Why is this specific geography facing these kinds of challenges? What happened? It's not as a result of disease or famine or natural disaster. So what is it?" And keep in mind, at this point, I'm just a white guy. Actually, I'm still a white guy, but I'm a white guy who grew up in a very classic suburban Beaver Cleaver-esque kind of upbringing in suburban East Tennessee. My only experience with under-resourced, segregated communities to date, at that point, had been watching Boys in the Hood as a college student. In other words, I knew nothing about the Hood, but yet I found myself asking why the Hood existed. And I didn't feel, in the context of this strategy session, I just didn't feel that I was qualified to come up with strategies to fight a problem that I didn't understand the underlying causes to. I didn't feel that it was okay for me to be ignorant to the causes of the problem. One, because being ignorant might mean that I was ambivalent and quite content to sit in my happy little bubble. Or two, worse, perhaps that I was willing to accept the easy explanations that the people of these communities are lazy, foolish, or perhaps created their own problems for themselves. I set out to find some answers. Facts, not opinions or hearsay, of which we all know there are plenty. Facts. I went crazy. It consumed my life. I read 200 books. I interviewed 100 people, people that lived in the community, people that worked in the community, professional poverty fighters. And what I found was shocking. Shocking for two reasons. One, because everything that I'm about to tell you is true. And two, because nobody is talking about it. Standing next to me here is a map of the city of Chicago from 1939. I acquired this map from the United States National Archives. It was created by an organization, a federal organization called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The purpose of the map was to assist the FHA in determining neighborhoods that the FHA would insure mortgages in. You see, the FHA had recently been created as a part of the National Housing Act of 1934. The FHA was charged with insuring mortgages in all of our country that would allow banks to freely lend with virtually no risk. The idea here was to help us get out of the Depression and incent banks to put money back into the real estate market. 239 of these maps were made, of 239 urban areas. This happened at a very interesting point in our country's history, the Great Migration, where 6 million African Americans moved from the South to the rest of the country to escape Jim Crow-era segregation and to seek opportunity elsewhere. Over 1 million African Americans came to Chicago alone between 1910 and 1960. So, as I was studying this migration of African Americans from the South to Chicago, I found something interesting. Around 200,000 African Americans moved to the city of Chicago between 1910 and 1930, and yet they were migrating to 3 of the 77 neighborhoods in Chicago. What this map shows us is anything that's dark blue is over 90% white, and anything that's red is over 90% black. This seemed odd to me. 200,000 new residents, only occupying a very small geography. What was the story there? Enter the restrictive covenant. Restrictive covenants were covenants attached to the deed of, at one point, over 80% of the real estate in Chicago that stated that a non-Caucasian could not own or occupy that particular space. These covenants were prevalent over the entire country. Once again, 239 of these maps were made, and I'll get back to the map in a minute. But local real estate commissions had encouraged people to go out and encourage these restrictive covenants to be attached to the deeds of a lot of property in predominantly white neighborhoods, and they were very successful. So back to the map, what we see is a large number of people moving into a very small geography of all of our urban centers, and we see, and it takes a tremendous toll on the housing stock of the community. You've got apartment units that were meant for one or two people that are housing 2, 3, and 4 families, because legally they're not allowed to live in any other part of the city. This creates a huge problem for the federal government, the recently created FHA, who is charged with insuring mortgages in those areas. The risk was deemed too great for the federal government to write the insurance on that particular property, and so anytime that African Americans were known to be living in an area, that area was colored red on the map. Remember, I don't think I mentioned this, but there were 4 categories of risk: green, blue, yellow, red. Red being the highest level of risk. A red neighborhood was rarely, if ever, offered mortgage insurance. Therefore, banks, in the wake of the Depression, were unwilling to lend in those neighborhoods. Meanwhile, in the non-redlined neighborhoods, this term became known as redlining in the 60s. Meanwhile, in the non-redlined neighborhoods, the FHA is encouraging restrictive covenants, basically saying, we will underwrite insurance in these neighborhoods if there's a restrictive covenant that lasts for a period of 25 to 30 years. Now imagine yourself as a homeowner in the city of Chicago. You know about this practice. You've been encouraged by the local real estate board to attach a restrictive covenant on your property. You may or may not have a moral or ethical problem with this, but imagine what the reality that you're faced with. There are no buyers without a mortgage. There are no mortgages without the restrictive covenant because there's no insurance. So the second half of the Great Migration found a good bit of, what I found was that there were a lot of African Americans moving to the city of Chicago that were bringing job skills and wealth with them. But faced with this reality that the only place that they are allowed to legally occupy, there is no mortgage insurance and therefore no lenders, homeownership is near impossible. enter a new practice, a real estate practice known as blockbusting. Blockbusting was where a real estate investor would literally walk up, knock on the door of a white homeowner, and using scare tactics, such as hiring African American women to walk by while he's speaking to the homeowner, say, the minorities are moving in. Look what they're doing to the neighborhoods that they are living in. The houses are dilapidated. You're going to lose value. That, combined with the scarcity of buyers because of the FHA's practice and unwillingness to insure mortgages, the blockbuster was able to buy these homes for much less than market value. They would turn around, and if there was a restrictive covenant on that property, remove the restrictive covenant and sell that property on a contract to an African American family for 2 to 3 times what they just paid for it. This contract was basically like a private mortgage. However, no deed was transferred. The buyer, the African American family, was responsible for all maintenance, property taxes, upkeep, and building code violations, of which oftentimes the blockbusters themselves were either building inspectors or held influence over the building commission. One missed payment would result in all of the equity being lost from the home, an immediate eviction with no due process, and the blockbuster was free to sell the home over and over and over again. It's estimated that between 1940 and 1970, the practice of blockbusting and contract selling cost the African American population $500 million. To put that in perspective, in 1960, there were 813,000 African Americans living in the city of Chicago, men, women, and children. In 1960, $500 million in 1960 dollars is worth just over $4 billion today. So the need for the dilapidated communities, the housing stock, and combined with the economic realities that came from my clicker just went crazy on me. Sorry, guys. This economic hardship combined with the housing stock being in disrepair created a real need for affordable housing in these communities. And for those of you that are not aware of what affordable housing is, it's defined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, as affordable if you're not paying more than 30% of your income in rent. In Chicago, there are 350,000 households making less than $30,000 a year. 2/3 of that are making less than $200,000 a year. And yet HUD defines the fair market value of a 2-bedroom apartment in the city of Chicago to be $1,176. So clearly we have a problem with a lot of rent-burdened families in the city of Chicago. And the CHA, Chicago Housing Authority, is able to serve about 59,000 families with Section 8 housing vouchers and as well as housing units themselves. But it still leaves quite a gap. As evidence, in 2014, the CHA opened up their wait list that would hold 96,000 names for housing assistance. 280,000 families applied in the first month. So as I looked at the history, the maps, the policies, combined with the economic realities, what I'm finding is that what I concluded was that these communities are suffering from disinvestment, and there's a need for affordable housing. What if we could bring real investment, scalable investment, to the communities by providing affordable housing? It's clear that the 280,000 families that are applying for housing assistance are evidence that the government alone cannot keep up with the demand for affordable housing. And so my thought was private investment needed to be engaged. So I built a model. I studied multifamily housing, and the model was pretty simple. The hypothesis was we need scale. We need scale and the efficiencies and economies of scale that scale brings. By doing so, we'd be able to possibly offer affordable housing for an entire portfolio of people. but we needed investors. We needed investors who, yes, wanted to make money, but also saw the scalable and sustainable benefits of such an organization. And we needed banks willing to lend in these neighborhoods. Not an easy task, I might add. I was met with resistance every step of the way. When I told my family and friends that I had just quit my job to follow my dreams of becoming an affordable housing developer in the under-resourced communities, my very good job as a partner in a derivatives trading firm, I was told, "You just quit your job to become a slumlord?" No, I quit my job to put slumlords out of business. In fact, if we accomplish our goal, which is to create the highest quality housing experience in the country, regardless of zip code, the market's going to do it for me. We were met by resistance from investors, time and time and time again. I heard, "You seem like you've got a lot of passion, Adam. You seem like a relatively smart guy. And this idea seems interesting, but man, those neighborhoods are crazy. I mean, I saw Boys in the Hood. And why don't you go ahead and get it started? I'm in. I love it. I'm in. Get it started. Call me when it's working." Thanks. City of Chicago has a residential landlord tenant ordinance. It was originally passed to protect tenants from slumlords. Good intentions. It allows for a tenant to sue a landlord for a myriad of petty things, infractions like not paying the 0.01% interest on a security deposit in the proper manner. That doesn't sound like a big deal to be sued for a dime on $1,000 worth of interest, on $1,000 worth of security deposit. However, but there's one small piece in the ordinance that allows for that tenant to sue for and recover 100% of their own attorney's fees with no cap. Now consider what that means. It has created an entirely new generation and industry of professional landlord suers. So the barriers to entry are almost endless in providing affordable housing to under-resourced communities. And what that means is, what that results in is smart people staying away from the business. But alas, I'm not that smart. So it's taken 5 long years to get a little tiny piece of what feels like some bit of success. We have 26 buildings, 700 apartment units, all of which 100% are affordable by HUD standards. We employ 25 full-time people and an army of independent contractors, electricians, plumbers, roofers, and of course, the army of attorneys who are on retainer and in the courthouse daily on our behalf. But the point is not to promote one particular company or idea. The point is that I feel like other entrepreneurs, my hope is that other entrepreneurs would join me in taking a look at perhaps large-scale social challenges, understand the underlying cause for those challenges, and not be afraid to ask, why is it this way? And perhaps ask, even more importantly, does it have to stay this way? Thank you.